Okay, how can I test that an EC2 instance is able to access the internet by using a NAT gateway? The EC2 instance is in a private subnet, and the NAT gateway is in the public subnet. The VPC, which both of these subnets are in, has a internet gateway in it. To test if an EC2 instance can access the internet, you've got to confirm some things. The route table for the private subnet should have a route to the NAT gateway, yes. The public subnet, the route table for the public subnet should have a route to the internet gateway, yes. 0000 to the internet gateway. The EC2 instance in the private subnet should have a private IP address and no public IP. No public IP. AWS EC2 describe instances. Whoops. Describe instances. What? What did I do? What did I do? Describes. Okay. Well, does it have a public IP address? It's got a private IP address. It does have a public IP address. It says public IP address 35177. Well, my EC2 instance does seem to have a public IP address. Will this be a problem? If your EC2 instance has a private IP address, it could potentially cause some confusion or issues. Yeah, it should have no public IP. It should rely on the NAT gateway. So if your EC2 instance was launched with a public IP, you can dissociate the public IP by stopping and starting the instance without enabling the auto-assign public IP option. Alternatively, you can create a new EC2 instance in the private subnet without assigning a public IP. Yeah, I think I should remove it. Let's have a look. So when I did run instances, this is the command that I used to create the EC2 instance. All of these parameters get defaulted for you, and look how many there are. So -- user data, -- subnet ID, -- security groups, security group IDs, RAM disk ID. You've got the placement parameter, -- monitoring, -- key name. But is there a parameter that's like public IP? Do you want to give it a public IP? Not really. We've got IP version 6 address count. I'm not interested in version 6. I'm interested in version 4, a normal classic IP address. You can specify an image ID, an instance type, dash CPU options, that's another parameter, a launch template. You've got a DNS name, but remember that's not an IP address, that's a DNS name. We've got dash private IP address. We've got no CLI auto prompt, CLI auto prompt, no CLI pager, CLI binary, CLI connect timeout, CLI read timeout. We've got dash color, dash no sign request. We've got good old dash query, where people have quibbles about James path and the index expressions and the question mark tucked into the beginning of the square brackets. We've got dash no paginate, dash debug. Oh, hello. And we have dash no associate public IP address. Got it. No, so that's what we should have done. Dash no associate public IP address. But is there a possibility to remove the IP address of an instance if it's already running? What we need to do is stop and start the instance without enabling the auto assign public IP option. Just check there's no parameter with auto in the name. That's CLI auto prompt, that's not it. Okay, no, so there's no parameter with auto in the name. So what I'm going to do, let's see if we can stop the instance. Stop instances. It stops an Amazon EBS backed instance. For more information, see stop and start in the user guide for EC2. You can use the stop action to hibernate an instance if you've enabled hibernation, if it's like a hedgehog, and it meets the hibernation prerequisites. We don't charge usage for a stopped instance or data transfer fees. However, your root partition, Amazon EBS volume, remains, and that will continue to persist your data, and you'll be charged for that. Every time you start your instance, Amazon EC2 charges a 1 minute minimum for instance usage. Every time you start your instance, we've got a 1 minute minimum for usage of it, and thereafter charges per second for usage of it. You can't stop an instance, store-backed instance. You can't use the stop action to hibernate a spot instance. A spot instance, which is where you just pay for it, and it can get taken away from you, and it's cheap, and you're just using spare capacity that Amazon have. That's what spot instance is. Can't actually stop those, but you can specify that EC2 should hibernate spot instances when they are interrupted. Because if they've taken it away from you to give to someone else, fair enough, you can then, that makes sense, you can then hibernate it. Presumably that just means it doesn't come back on as soon as they're ready to give it back. When you stop or hibernate an instance, we shut it down. You can restart your instance at any time. Remember, if you're not clear, stopping, the word stopping is different from terminating. Stopping is temporary. That's a bad way to remember it. Temporary. The word terminate starts with T. But anyway, stopping is temporary. Before stopping or hibernating, make sure it's in a state from which it can be restarted. Stopping an instance doesn't preserve data stored in that ephemeral, very volatile, random access RAM, which is just lost when we stop it. But hibernating an instance, that does preserve data stored in RAM. So there's hibernation is like we just freeze the RAM, and even though it's usually thought of as volatile memory, actually we do preserve it with hibernation. So hibernation huddles around the RAM and preserves it. If an instance can't hibernate successfully, a normal shutdown occurs. Stopping and hibernating an instance is different to rebooting or terminating it. For example, when you stop or hibernate an instance, the root device, meaning the fundamental device, and any other devices attached to the instance persist. That's when you stop, which is temporary. It's not full-blown termination. Right? We persist the root device. When you terminate an instance, full-blown termination, the root device and any other devices are deleted. Okay. That's the command. I'm just checking there's no parameter that's like delete public IP when you stop it, because remember, that's why we're doing this. I'm only stopping it so that I can start it again without the public IP. So it's probably wise that we get have a look at the command we're going to use to bring it back as well. Is it start? It's got to be start. No. Start instances. There we go. Let's just take this in for a minute. So we've got instance IDs. We need to know what we're starting. -- additional info. -- dry run. CLI input JSON. Do we want to generate a CLI skeleton? -- debug. No verify SSL, that parameter. CLI auto prompts, no CLI auto prompts. -- color. -- region. -- query. There's no filter, the fantastic filters parameter here, because what can you filter? It's an action, you're starting the instance. But there's no thing about not starting with the public IP. So let's investigate that. So I'm trying to remove the public IP from my EC2 instance. However, there's no parameter for the restart command that has anything to do with not having a public IP. Perhaps you can provide some guidance about what you mean when you say that we should restart the instance to take away its public IP address. I've provided the start instances command to show that there's only parameters that are like the general ones, the global ones like color. You're correct. Let's have it read out.
You're correct that there is no direct parameter in the start instances command for removing a public IP. What I meant by restarting the instance is that public IP addresses are assigned when an EC2 instance is launched, and stopping and restarting the instance will remove the public IP if it was dynamically assigned at launch. However, here's a breakdown of the steps for removing the public IP. 1. Stop the instance. When you stop an EC2 instance, its dynamic public IP, if it was assigned during launch, will be released and removed. Bash AWS EC2 stop instances, instance IDs, your instance ID. 2. Ensure auto-assigned public IP is disabled. When launching an EC2 instance in a private subnet, make sure that the auto-assigned public IP option is disabled. If it was enabled during the instance's initial launch, it would have assigned a public IP. Note, there's no need to manually remove the public IP in this case. You would just need to disable it for future launches. 3. Start the instance again. After the instance is stopped, you can start it again. Since the instance had no static public IP assigned, it will not receive a new public IP. -- bash AWS EC2 start instances, instance-IDs your instance ID. 4. Confirm public IP is removed. Once the instance is restarted, you can verify that the public IP is no longer associated with the instance by using the describe instances command. Bash AWS EC2 describe instances dash instance IDs your instance ID, query reservations 0, instances 0, public IP address. If no public IP is returned, the instance is using a private IP only. What if the instance...
So what you're saying is, I really do just have to stop it and start it. And there's, even though you say make sure that the auto-assign public IP option is disabled, what you're saying is I don't need to make sure that that option is disabled when I restart the instance, because we'll find that there is no such option. And when we look on here, when we start, there's nothing to do with auto-assign. Profile, right? So what you're saying is, if you were to launch an instance and you wanted to make sure that it didn't have a public IP from the offset, yes, you would make sure you'd toggle that. We're not going to find that. However, it is still the case that by stopping the instance and starting it again, there just won't be a public IP. I presume that's what you're saying. So I'm going to try that now. So we're going to use this stop instances command. Let's come over here. Let's sketch it out. What's my instance ID? Well, I'm going to do Control F on Notepad for I dash. Where are we? Here we go. Back to the bottom, Control End. Paste in my instance ID, and we're going to bring that to a halt now. Execute that. Okay, it's stopping. Now we're going to restart it. Sketch. Load up the value for that parameter, which the parameter being dash dash instance IDs. And again, there's no sort of parameter that we're doing. If this is correct, then this is enough, just to stop and start it. Oh no. Okay, so maybe it hasn't stopped yet. So first we have to it may be taking a couple of minutes to stop. So if I do describe instances, maybe it's just stopped, but it says state disabled. So when we say we've stopped it, we have disabled it. They're the same. Disabled, stopped. Does it have a public IP? Public IP. I can't see one. Can you see one? Private IP address. Private DNS name. DNS name that's private. So already we can see I can't see public IP anymore. It looks like it's already gone because it's stopped by the time we did describe instances, right? So source destination, source desk check, status, subnet ID, VPC ID, interface type, why is it in its state? So we have this state reason, and it says, well, the user initiated a shutdown, and I did. Right, so let's try and bring it back now. Okay, good, it worked. It is starting. It is not started, but it is starting, and it was stopped. Tells us that the previous state was stopped. And they give a code. It looks like they give a code to all the states. So 80 is the code for stopped. But I know that it's already. Well, we still need to confirm that now that it's back up and running, it's without a public IP. I think it's much cleaner for the practical if it doesn't have a public IP, because then we can be sure that if it does communicate, it's making use of its private IP. Because remember, we want this EC2 instance to send traffic to the NAT gateway. So can we see a public IP? Let's go back to the top of the command. It's got an image ID, good. It's got an instance ID, an instance type, it's t3.micro. It's not being monitored, monitoring state is disabled. It's in EU West 2B, which is good, because remember, we're using 2A for our public subnet. And this is not in the public subnet, that's good, it's in 2B, our actual EC2 instance. It's got a private DNS name, it's got a private IP address, it's got a public DNS name, oh dear, and it has a public IP address. Okay. So that hasn't worked. So it's got a public IP address, right? So maybe our interpretation was incorrect, but that method did not work. It's not enough to merely stop and start an instance. Maybe this ChatGPT was wrong, maybe we interpreted it wrong, but that is not enough. Yeah, I mean, we could do a more precise command using query, and we can use an index expression on reservations, get the first instance, and then get public IP address. We should probably do that, actually. So I just want to absolutely verify that it does still, we've restarted it, and it still has a public IP. So we'll put the instance ID in here. And what this query is doing, people have quibbles with JamesPath. This is not the filter, this is query, where we like to use index expressions. This means we're going to the key, which is reservations. It says reservations in speech mark. We're getting the 0th element within that named list, and then we're going within that and getting the key called instances and getting the 0th element within that, and then we're going to what we want is for you to come back and tell me the value of public IP address. So copy, go to the command line. Let's see if, so it's describe instances again, but it's just made more precise. But this often doesn't work with me. I don't know why. Maybe it doesn't like it's Windows. Maybe it's command on Windows. Maybe it doesn't like the single quotation marks. Maybe it wants them, so I'm going to remove them. I'm just going to do some very brief troubleshooting, but if not, it doesn't matter. So does it like it to be laid bare like that? Oh, it does. There you go. 3.8.184.74, yeah. So it's got a public IP. Right. Is there any way to remove a public IP address from a running EC2 instance? "4 years ago, Shane Fast. How to remove a public IP." Let's have a look. Once an instance is started, there isn't a magical button to remove an auto-assigned public IP. Exactly, it's auto-assigned indeed. Certainly, there has to be others who faced a similar issue. Of course, you could always take a snapshot, terminate the instance, and start a new instance without a public IP, but that takes time. There's got to be a better way. After looking at what other people suggested, I was disheartened. Let's see some forums weigh in. And there's a picture of a forum that says you can't do it, you're going to have to relaunch. You can't. Okay, not looking good. So he's providing evidence that he's looked at Reddit, looked at intellipact.com, looked at the AWS forum. Looks like it can't be done. Here are the steps. Go to your running EC2 instance with your public IP. Note the region and availability zone. On the management console, go to Network Interfaces. On the drop-down, once there, click Create Network Interface. Give it a memorable name. For the subnet, pick a matching one for the instance, pick the subnet that the instance is in for this interface. Click Create. Next, go to Elastic IPs. After you create a new Elastic IP, associate that with the EC2 instance. Next, go back to your running EC2. Right-click and select Attach the Network Interface. From here, attach the network interface you made. Next, dissociate the Elastic IP from the instance. If done properly, the public IP should disappear. Now, am I right in saying the Elastic IP was actually on the interface? The interface. Is that what he's done? Oh no, because he says associate it with the instance. Okay. But then he attaches... So why are we doing this? So attach a network interface to the instance. From here, attach the network interface. And then you remove the Elastic IP. Oh, okay. So the thought is that maybe you're allowed to... you're kind of tricking it, sort of... If you... maybe it's the case that... Next, dissociate the Elastic IP. If done properly, the public IP should disappear. Now you might think, well, why has it done that? Why has the public IP disappeared just because you've removed your portable Elastic IP? Surely it just shoves in another one, and it must just be a fact that it doesn't. Maybe they've designed it so that you know that if you dissociate an Elastic IP, it's such an intentional action that it's clear that you don't want there to be an IP on that instance, and it just allows you to not have an IP, and it doesn't automatically refill the instance with an IP. Finally, detach the network interface. This will remove the second private IP that was added. Make sure to disassociate the Elastic IP first before detaching the extra network interface. Overall, this process only takes about 30 seconds as opposed to potentially an hour or more to take a snapshot. Okay. Still seems a lot of work. So again, we have to add two entities to our instance: a network interface. No. Actually, the network interface is just there. You put it in a subnet. Next, go to Elastic IPs, associate that. Now that does get associated with the instance. Next, go back to your running EC2, right-click it, and select. Oh, and okay, yeah. So we do actually. So we've sort of attached these two entities on the network interface and the Elastic IP, and then we remove them both. We remove the Elastic IP, and then we finally remove the network interface as well. And by the time you've removed the network interface, this will remove the second private IP that was added. Oh my word! So, do we want to do that? Yes, so the first step would be an elastic IP. Well, we already have an elastic IP which is used for our NAT gateway. EIP. There's no command with EIP in it. Okay. We'll carry this on in the next video. We've got allocate address. That's what we use to sort of create an elastic IP.